How do I do sit down types of how do I do sit down types of videos, right? Because I got this question on Twitter. How do I do, and I'm assuming this is like also podcast type of stuff where you're talking to people. How do I make this video interesting for my audience so that it actually gets views and I'm not wasting my time? Now, sit down videos are categorized in a few ways. So podcast is one of them, having a conversation with someone. And ultimately, those are really the two categories that I would consider sit down type of content. So, getting a video to hit 300,000 views in a sit down or podcast type of format is really great. So, nice job, Steph. But one thing I'll say is there's a strategy to this that you can use to get more attention and also get your audience to stick around for the future. Because you mentioned going back down to, 1 to 10K views per video. And so I'll kind of share some strategies on what you can use to, number one, increase your audience retention, because with long form content with, maybe 30 minutes to an hour plus type of length, you're going to get really good RPMs. And you want to maximize that because especially when you're not going to get, viral in the sense of like millions of views, or who knows, you could, but generally speaking, you could get between 100K to a million views on sit down type of content. And you want to maximize that. So obviously length is going to be key. The longer the video, the better, without adding too much fluff. You don't want to let your audience just get bored over time. So make sure, obviously, naturally, I'm going to make sure that some of the obvious is also stated, is make the content interesting. Number two is going to be how you present the content in the beginning. Like, how do you set up the expectations for your video so that your audience wants to watch that part of the video? You've got to keep your audience hooked on your content even before they watch, 2 minutes of the video. So how do you do this? Well, I've used a strategy on YouTube to do this, and it's something that I also learned from Jay Klaus. So I'll first kind of go over mine. I'm going to show you kind of what I did with this video. If you want to learn more about the strategies behind YouTube thumbnails, David Altiza and I go into discussion with that on how you can do that. But let me just show you a little bit of the structure of what your intro would look like.
I was able to build a channel to about 80,000 subscribers before I was then hired by a channel called Indie Mogul. They hired me to come on board and be the host and creative director of the channel.
That's David Altiza. He's worked on and with massive YouTube channels to help grow them, and he's helped creators generate millions of views. David has also created and worked with Hayden Heller Smith, the story and editing master of YouTube. David created a space for himself in the world of YouTube and cinematography. His work gained massive attention with major companies like Vimeo and Google.
And it was this producer who was working with Google on creating a $500,000 commercial, and they were referencing my video in their meetings and saying, we want our commercials to look like this. And so they were like, well, why don't we just reach out to that guy?
He was on the top of his filmmaking career, but then one day everything changed.
I felt God very clearly tell me to walk away from my YouTube channel.
His decision to leave the space of creating content was a strange one, yes, but David started to make a name for himself in thumbnail design and psychology, and is the man who has helped generate over 120 million views for creators like Curtis Connor, Max Fosh, and Drew Gooden. He's going to make you reconsider your current thumbnail creation process.
I designed the format with like the timeline with the like shot of the movie on the top, for the editing podcast.
In this video, you'll discover the 5-step process David uses to create viral thumbnails, why your packaging is killing your click-through rate and how to fix it, the number one mistake most creators make when recording their videos, and we'll dive deep into the psychology of YouTube thumbnails and audience psychology to get the click. Because first, you need to understand the one key principle that the entire success of your YouTube video relies on, and that's the ideation process. So David, can you kind of walk us through how you make... Now, tell me if you noticed something there. One thing that I did with this video was the ideation. It was very important for me to plan ahead to figure out how I was going to make this interesting. Hopefully you're hooked by now. Hopefully you're interested in watching the whole podcast. How did I do that? I set up the expectations for the video, but also made it interesting. I presented it in an interesting way that got you interested in what you want to learn about that particular thing. Often I set up like in this video, you will learn XYZ. People want to know what they're going to get out of the video. Otherwise, if you're not clear about what they could potentially get out of it, they have a chance for leaving your video, or there's a higher chance of that happening. One thing I did was I didn't go, welcome to this podcast. David is this, this, and this, and we're talking to the camera and keeping things fun and lively. I actually made that recorded that section after the entire podcast was recorded. So I had my meeting with David. We kind of spoke through things. I didn't say, hey, David, tell the audience who you are and what you are, blah, blah, blah. I did ask him to tell me about that kind of stuff so I could say that in an interesting way and set up the hook and the intro for my video to be interesting. So he did say that, but I cut that out from the original podcast episode and made that interesting. And we're just getting right into, like you can see here, I'm getting right into the content.
Or vet ideas so that you can.
So I went straight into the first question. Now, one thing that I did was after I recorded or after I watched where I wanted to start the podcast, I made sure that the end of my sentence rolled seamlessly into that podcast. So it felt like I just was right there recording the intro and then started talking to David. It's a lot easier of a transition for your audience, and it's not boring and slow or jaded and disconnected. So transitions is going to be super important from your intro to the body of your podcast, and even with sponsors. So if you've got sponsors for the podcast, you also want to make it super relatable. So you got to understand who's the sponsor, like obviously before the podcast, and set up a question that tailors to that particular brand. So ask the guest a particular question, they give their response. Then what you could say is, yeah, that's really interesting. It reminds me of blah, 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 given experience, but then morph that or transition slowly into the sponsorship segment so it appears as part of the value of the podcast so your audience doesn't skip it. Often people go, and now time for a break for our sponsor, and then they give the call to action of the sponsor, the sponsorship segment, and then they go right back. Thanks, sponsor, for sponsoring this. Let's get back into the podcast. And then you go back and resume. And often people even put timestamps to show where the sponsorship segment is. As a sponsor, I don't want to see that because people go, oh, I'm just going to skip this part, go back to where resume. I'm not interested in the sponsorship segment. So that's something that you can leverage to get more just more revenue from the brand, and also keep your audience watching so that you can make more conversions, because then they start to realize, oh, this brand is actually really powerful and it's part of the value that they're providing. I want to, pay for that service too. And so integrating your brand deals is going to be super important. What I've done in past episodes is, and I call them episodes, I'll tell you why I don't call them that. What I've done in the past is after I've recorded the podcast, I'll actually record the sponsorship segment at the end or just on another sitting, making sure I had the same lighting and the same shirt to make it seem like I'm actually there doing that with David. But I actually didn't record the sponsorship segment during the call. I just made sure to structure the video or the question around my sponsor. The guest gives their response, you give your rebuttal or your response, provide value, and slowly morph into the value of the sponsor in the sponsorship segment. And then at the end of that, I do say, thanks, sponsor, for sponsoring this video. And then I immediately go into the next question or try and relate it to the next question. So the question, sponsorship segment, and question, these two questions or topics are going to be super related to my sponsor. One thing I'll do is I'll provide a sponsor segment right after a gratification moment. So for example, let's say the question before the sponsorship segment is something that people really want to know about and provides immense value. Right after that value segment, I go straight into morphing into the sponsorship segment because that's when your audience attention is the highest. That's how you get really powerful call to actions to get your audience to click and actually do what you want them to do, generating more revenue with your brand deals, affiliates, whatever it is you're doing. It's really powerful. Now, back to the episode thing. I mentioned that I don't call my podcast episodes for two particular reasons. Number one, if a viewer is going to see your video in the recommendations on YouTube and they see episode 5 or hashtag 8, they see that this is a series, they go, oh, I need to watch the first X amount of episodes to understand the context to episode 5 or 8. And so they're not going to go ahead and click on that thumbnail or that video as much as if the video was branded as a standalone video, or if the podcast was branded as a standalone video. So that's why I'm tailoring my podcast episodes. I don't really call them that, but for lack of a better term, that's why I brand them as their standalone video, an hour and 17 minutes worth of value in terms of how to understand thumbnails. And I think this is where podcasts are kind of moving, like with the exception of some of the big boys who don't really need to be considerate of episode content, like Joe Rogan, for example. He doesn't have to worry about episode 2005 because people know that he's a really good podcaster and it's interesting, and I don't need all that context to understand this episode. But he's the exception. You are not, and neither am I. Now, my video here didn't, broke 300 views after 3 weeks. You can see it's, why, Murray, why are you talking about this if there's not a lot of views? Great question. I mean, it's not all about the views. It's all about what the revenue you get from that video. But I am starting a new strategy on the channel, and it's different to what the audience is used to. And I also checked off that box where it says distribute to subscribers or subscriber feed or something like that. I checked that off because I didn't want to jade my audience or confuse them as to why I'm uploading this, because I'm slowly changing the content. And I don't want that new audience or that existing audience to send bad signals about this video and YouTube completely kills it. It's still getting views and still getting impressions, but I'm getting that new audience interested in the video and avoiding the bad signals from my existing audience who may not be as interested in this topic as my target audience would be. But let's talk about Jay Clouse here. So just to show you an example, Jay Clouse does a similar format in terms of how interesting the intro is, similar to what I've done. I've learned quite a few tricks from his podcast just by watching. There's a couple things where I feel like they could have been improved, but he has a fantastic channel, 112,000 subscribers with 147 videos. Fantastic. Watch a few of his most popular videos and you'll kind of get a sense. Like, he's generating 3.6 million views on a podcast, 243,000, 213,000. You see the numbers. It's very evident that he's got a really good strategy working. And what you want to do is watch a few of those. You can watch mine as well if you want. I'll link it in the top right in the cards on just thumbnail strategy in general. Go check it out and let me know what you think. So hopefully this provided some value. If you want to learn more about this stuff, I do have 7 days of free coaching you can get access to. So I'll send you every single day some coaching with the link in the description. Go sign up with your email. I send it right to your inbox and you get 7 days of free coaching. No credit card needed. It's fantastic. I should pay for it, and maybe or make you pay for it, but maybe I will one day when I come to my senses. But for now, it's free. So get it while it's free. Free value, free training on how to understand ideation, figure out how to make videos go viral, understand your niche, pick the right niche, how long should I be in that niche if it isn't working, a lot of different topics, but also how to get audience retention and satisfaction, which is fantastic because it's the holy grail of YouTube and something that you should really, really work hard at, because if you can get your audience past the first 30 seconds and get to watch towards the end of your video, YouTube's naturally going to recommend it more, because the longer you kept that audience on YouTube, the more money YouTube's going to make because they see more ads. Pretty self-explanatory stuff. But that free training is there, link in the description. If you enjoyed this video, you'll definitely enjoy the podcast on how to understand audience psychology when it comes to thumbnails and some of the strategy involved with that, because it's not just as simple as slap a thumbnail on my video and I'm good to go. So check the video out here, hit it before it ends, and I'll see you there.